Welcome to the launch of the world's first 6-part Bookinar series hosted by Etmanski. Al's latest book, Impact 6 Patterns to Spread Your Social Innovation, explores in depth each of the 6 mutually reinforcing patterns which are being used by successful change makers. Each 1-hour session in this series, Al will focus on one of the 6 patterns identified in his book and interview the person who revealed the pattern to him through their convictions and their work. Today's Bookinar is entitled Think and Act Like a Movement, and Al has invited Marian Tompson, co-founder of Leche League International, to join him. I will now turn it over to Al to begin his conversation with Marian about Think and Act Like a Movement.
Well, thank you, Christy. Thank you very much. Thank you and all the folks at Tamarack. Hello, listeners out there in Webland. I'm so delighted that you've joined us today. I'm actually very, very excited to get into a conversation with our guest, Marian Tompson, founder of the Leche League, and I'll do that in a brief moment. But just to start, our pattern today is thinking and acting like a movement. And the reality is that each of us is part of at least one movement. I suspect that we're part of several movements. In fact, I can pretty well guarantee that you are, we are. And my belief is that spending some of our time, budgeting some of our resources, not even a lot, but making sure that we are intentional about supporting the movements we're a part of will, in fact, support us in achieving our organizational and institutional goals. And why is that? Well, I believe movements do what no other vehicle or container can do. They influence and ultimately change people's opinions, beliefs, habits, and what they think. No social enterprise, nonprofit, business, government agency, politician, funder, institution can accomplish that on their own. Movements create the receptivity, favorable public opinion, political will. Movements embolden our politicians, our policymakers, our funders, our superiors to make the decisions that will improve justice and reduce inequity in the world. And that's why I think movements are so important and why it is worth spending a wee bit of our time thinking and acting like a movement while we are doing all of the other work that we do. Today, I'm so delighted to introduce you to Marian Tompson, founder of the Leche League, for many reasons, and you will soon hear why when you hear Marian tell her own story. But my original work, our original work at Plan, which began over 27 years ago, was modeled on the work of the Leche League. We were impressed with the fact that they could not only create a very powerful and influential organization, but they could spawn a movement around the world as well. And how do you do both of those things intrigued us, but it was certainly a goal, an aspiration, an intention that we had. And thanks to my friend John McKnight, who lives in Chicago, where Marian does, he introduced me to Marian, and we've had several conversations. And as you may know if you've read my book, I profile Marian as the lead story in the pattern Thinking and Acting Like a Movement. So first of all, Marian is a mother of 7. Marian, welcome. How are you?
I'm just fine, Alan. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Now, you are also a grandmother, and lucky you, a great-grandmother.
That's right.
And you were, I think, is it true to say that you were actually in the presidency of the Leche for almost a quarter of a century, and that you are still active with them, but also you are a member of the International Advisory Council related to breastfeeding action around the world. Have I got that correct?
Yes, Leche was one of the core partners that started WABA, the World Association for Breastfeeding Action.
So that's a long way from beginning in suburban Chicago in the late 1950s. And because movements are effective at engaging with culture, I wondered if we could start, if you can remember back then, and give us the texture of the times. What was the culture saying about breastfeeding and mothers who wanted to breastfeed in the 1950s when you began to have children?
Well, most people didn't even think about breastfeeding. I mean, you could go to a doctor for all your prenatal work and nobody mentioned breastfeeding. It had sort of fallen out of sight once formula feeding became the way most babies were fed. In fact, at that time we started, only 18% of babies were breastfed at least once. And maybe for only a few weeks, if that long a time. So you didn't even see breastfeeding babies on the street. Nobody breastfed in public at that time either. So people didn't know what to do with them. I mean, doctors weren't given any education about breastfeeding. They might have a 1-hour talk on reasons why you shouldn't breastfeed your baby. They got a lot more information from the detail men for the formula companies who would come directly to their office and sit and talk with them. So many of them really didn't even know that there was a difference, that it made a difference, that human milk was uniquely designed for human babies. The baby books I had at that time said it didn't make any difference if you breastfed or bottle fed. They both were equal, which is so unscientific. Here you have a food that's on the one hand made for a cow that's going to gain about 700 or 800 pounds the first year, and a food that's uniquely designed for humans that might gain 20, 25 pounds that first year. But people, and even doctors, accepted it as not making a difference. I had friends who were actually, when they asked to breastfeed and wanted to breastfeed, had remarks that sound pretty impossible today, but we're told, well, if you're a good girl during the delivery, I'll let you breastfeed the baby. Or, do you really have to prove yourself a woman by breastfeeding? There was no understanding of what breastfeeding was really all about.
Marian, that's sending a chill down my spine. It's very sobering to be brought back to the way it used to be. How did you survive in that environment, and how did you and the other mothers who created Leche, how did you find each other?
Well, what had happened was, number one, I had had unmedicated births for my babies, so I soon found out that having a baby in the hospital wasn't the best choice for you or your baby. They weren't set up for women who were awake and aware and working with their bodies during labor. And then with my first 3 children, my husband and I went to 3 different pediatricians. None of them knew anything at all about breastfeeding. So when Mary White and I were at this picnic in the park in Elmhurst, Illinois, with our families, I had 4 children at that time. I had, through the help of Mary White and having had my 4th baby at home, I was successfully nursing that baby past a year. Before that, the longest I ever nursed was 6 months, because each doctor that I had told me that either my milk wasn't any good at that time, or I didn't have enough milk at that time, and I should put the baby on a formula. But when we went to this picnic, women who I knew to be bottle feeding women came up to me and were telling me about wanting to breastfeed their baby but not getting help. The same kind of situation I had been through myself 3 different times. And this was a surprise and an epiphany. I didn't know that other women were trying to breastfeed but were not successful because they didn't get help. And it struck me as being terribly unfair that women who wanted to do the very best for their baby weren't getting any help. So the next day or two, I went to Mary White's house and I said, Mary, you know, I'm really upset about what we learned from those mothers, and I would really like to do something about it. And would you be willing to or be interested in going along with me? We didn't know what it was going to be we were going to do. Mary, who was, I think, expecting her 7th child at the time, said immediately, yes, I'm in. And then she called up her sister-in-law who was nursing a baby. And I called up the only other woman in town that I knew who had breastfed, Edwina. And through them, they called what ended up being 7 of us who got together and talked about what should we do. There was nothing written at that time except for an article in Reader's Digest called Breast is Best that spoke to the unique value of breastfeeding. So we set up a schedule of meetings, 4 meetings, and 1 meeting just for the fathers, a 5th meeting, because we knew these men weren't getting any kind of information. And 2 of our doctors, Dr. White and Dr. Ratner, agreed to hold these meetings just for the men. So the men could ask the questions they wanted without any interference from their wives or anybody else. What we decided was, since there was really nothing written, we would have to share our own experiences. And that's what it was in the beginning, except for that one article in Reader's Digest, which I did read. We shared what happened in our own lives. Coming to a Leche meeting is a grand idea because you're in a community of women who breastfed. You can complain about any problems you've had. You get help for women who've been there. I think what a lot of people don't understand is that women who are breastfeeding are in a particular hormonal state that makes their body respond to their baby in the way that a babysitter or a dad can't, because they don't have that experience. They're not in that place. So quite often people will not understand why you're doing what you're doing, why you're taking your baby with you, why you're nursing your baby on demand, because they don't have that connection to the baby that you have.
Marian, from previous conversations I've had with you, it moved pretty fast. You know, it's a very interesting characteristic of, you know, movements that I've paid attention to is that you never know which is the spark, you know, that ignites a new stage in the movement. And for you and the 6 other mothers, it moved pretty fast. Could you describe a little bit about what began to happen? I think almost within 12 months, things started to tumble very quickly, didn't they?
Right. Within 12 months, things were changing totally into a different organization than we had expected. Before we were a year old, women who we had helped who lived in Chicago came to us and said, we'd like to start this in Chicago. What can we do? And so all of a sudden we had a new focus. We thought just the 7 of us were going to be helping mothers for maybe 4 or 5 years. And then those women who had come to us would have been taken care of, they would have been finished having babies, and we didn't realize all these other people were going to hear about us and want and need help. What I think is we were at that point in society where women were taking power into their own hands. They were fed up with other people telling them what to do who really didn't understand it. This is when Betty Friedan came out with the feminine mystique. And they were interested in this message that you can breastfeed your baby and to look to your baby for your guidance in how to be a mother.
Yeah, and you're reinforcing the point that I had referenced a little earlier, that we're actually part of at least one or two movements, and so one could argue that you helped ignite a movement in favor of mothers breastfeeding their babies, but you also united, linked up with, merged with, allied with the next wave of the women's movement. And so it's very, very, very interesting once you're conscious of that, and you can begin to play with that, I suspect, a little bit, and mutually reinforce each other. Would you agree with that?
Well, I certainly feel we do reinforce each other. I think the big surprise to us, because we were busy mothers having our own babies at the time, we weren't even looking upon this as a movement that was impacting the world, but we could see the ripple effect that was occurring as we went along. The first change was in bringing in childbirth into our sessions, because we realized a lot of women, in fact most women at that time, were being medicated during birth and sometimes didn't get their baby for a day, which really impacted the initiation of breastfeeding, because the baby was also given a bottle in the meantime, and there's a different way of getting food from a bottle and from a breast, and for some babies this caused problems. So there was also a move to home birth for a lot of women when they realized they needed a different kind of beginning relationship with their baby in order to have a successful breastfeeding experience. And then, of course, nursing in public. I mean, nobody did that. You didn't even know if a mother was a breastfeeding mother. But the women today that needed to be get out and needed to take care of other children, had other obligations, found that nursing in public was the only way they could live their life. Though at that time we had women who were sitting in their car nursing, being noticed by a policeman or a security officer, and then being taken to court because this was obscene behavior. Well, that has, I think every state in the United States now, women can nurse in public and will not be in fear of being taken to court because of it. But that was something that we weren't expecting. Also, the whole idea of baby-friendly hospitals. As I said, hospitals really weren't set up to help mothers to breastfeed. And in the United States right now, 54%, well, as of 2013, 54% of the hospitals in the United States now follow the 10 steps that are part of the baby-friendly hospital movement to give mothers more encouragement and support at the beginning. Laws passed to allow mothers, right where I live in Illinois, if you were called up for jury duty, breastfeeding a baby was not an excuse to get you dismissed. And now it is, because they understand you can't leave that baby if you're going to be involved in a court decision for several days. So there's just been, this is only some of the things, the ripple effect that we saw happening as a result of mothers and that close relationship they had with their babies in the beginning while breastfeeding.
It's a very, very nice phrase, Marian, ripple effect. It's very helpful too, and in this, in this suggestion that we think and act like a movement, it shouldn't detract us from the day-to-day work that we have to do or that we want to do with the issues that we're associated with. But it does mean that we pay attention to what else is going along, and obviously we can't align or ally with everything and everyone who's out there moving in more or less the same direction. But I wonder if you could just briefly identify, because you've already mentioned some of these, like the World Health Organization's baby-friendly hospital. But I know that there are now lactation consultants, there are, of course, academics, there are many, many, many other players who don't belong to Leche, but who are part of this broader movement. Could you just identify some of them, because it strikes me that you've become the grandmother of all of those as well. Who else is in your movement that you?
Well, it was actually the Leche leaders who started the whole lactation consultant forum. And when they began to get to the point where they were going to have an exam and get really official, we actually loaned them the money in order to do this, because we recognized that there was going to be a need for paid professionals who could be in hospitals or be part of doctors' practices, and we didn't want there to be a division, a polarization of the ones who were volunteers and who weren't paid, and the ones who were paid in order to help mothers, so who had a profession that would pay them money. So we tried, the whole idea in the beginning was working together as much as possible. Sometimes that doesn't work as well as we'd like it to, but it's something we continually work at, keeping the connection, the communications open between those two volunteer and paid professional occupations helping breastfeeding mothers. We're all trying to do the right thing. We all want mothers to succeed, and I think the more we can work together, the better that will be. I was just, well, in the United States, we have what's called the United States Breastfeeding Committee, and that's a coalition of about 70 organizations and agencies that in some way touch breastfeeding. And they meet together in Washington, D.C., and the whole idea is, how do we, through our many pathways, make sure that breastfeeding isn't being harmed by what we do? And this is Leche was a core partner in getting this started too, and it's a very advantageous and important group because of the many, many agencies that they are part of, so who are all very conscious of breastfeeding, because you can be tripped up in breastfeeding in so many ways right now, often in the United States, because we have such short maternity leaves, and some women might have no maternity leave at all. This is going to create a problem when you're starting out breastfeeding your baby and you really need a lot of time to get to know that baby and its breastfeeding patterns. So you want everybody to understand. The mother who's nursing in public, instead of somebody getting upset because she has to do it, should really be going up and patting her on the back and saying thank you, because her breastfeeding is impacting all of us, no matter where in the world she lives. There's not the footprint that formula brings into the world. You're just direct from the provider to the baby who's getting the milk. And of course that baby's going to be healthier, which means there's going to be less money put out from our taxes to help support that baby in the hospital. In fact, there have been a number of studies done in the United States to show how many millions of dollars would be saved if every mother was able and wanted to breastfeed her baby for the first 6 months of life. Which makes me realize I hadn't mentioned in the Leche from the beginning, we have not been out to force or even try to convince women to breastfeed their babies. We're there to help the mothers who want to breastfeed. That's been what we did from the beginning. But we also promote a better understanding of the value of breastfeeding so that the culture will give support to that mother and not make it more difficult for her.
So, Marian, you're raising a couple of questions in my mind, and then we'll begin to move to some questions from our listeners. My goodness, I could go on. I could listen to you forever. But I guess the preface to the question is the thing about movements is that everybody belongs to a movement by definition. There's no price of admission, if you will. And the other thing is that no one's in charge. And so it's likely that there are going to be people in there that you might not like, or you might be a little suspicious of, or who you may have betrayed or may have betrayed you in some way, or you think might. And so this question of conflict or nurturing trust comes forward for me. And you just a minute ago mentioned that you strove very hard to reconcile, to make sure there were no divisions. But I wondered if you could, tell us of maybe an example of where a potential conflict came up within Leche, or with some of the other players as you began to grow as a broader than an organization, and you've told me a few of those before, but has one come to your mind about how you dealt with conflict and your intention to nurture trust?
Well, we had one, the first significant one took place just among the 7 founders. We had always been in agreement about everything we were doing in the Leche, and all of a sudden the abortion issue came up, and 2, I think, of the 7 founders were very strongly in favor of the Leche taking a stand against abortion, not being a single issue organization, but including abortion in that issue. One of the founders at one of our conferences actually put flyers on everybody's seat in the big auditorium when people were coming for the first plenary session. There were a lot of discussion about it, and finally the agreement was that we would be a one-issue organization, that we weren't going to be, we didn't have the time or the money to get involved in other issues, because we couldn't get involved in an issue just by agreeing with it. We would have to understand what was going on in back, why it was happening, who were involved. So it took quite a while and a lot of discussion. And when you talk about trust, at that period in time with those 2 particular people who we love dearly, we weren't trusting them to always give a talk at a plenary session, because it might just all of a sudden turn into an issue about supporting the anti-abortion movement. So that was one that happened among us 7, and it did take a lot of talk and discussion before we came to that agreement.
And did you?
Oh yes, we did. The other 2 always felt sorry that was the decision, but they went along with it. And we love these women, you know, but this is where their heart was. And I felt it was, and the other five felt it was extremely important to just be a one-issue organization. At that time, even though it seems absolutely silly, we were really being also asked to speak out against, they had come out with baby dolls, and with the males who were very obviously male dolls, and there were people who were offended by that kind of, I wanted us to take stands. We were also people wondered why we didn't take stands against formula companies. And I met with many of the organizations that did take stands, that this was their action, but I felt that wasn't our role. We really we spent so much time just focusing on giving mothers what they needed in order to successfully breastfeed. We really didn't have time to get involved in the other organizations. But we always told people about them, so they would have a way of getting in touch with them. So we didn't hide them. We let them know this is out there, and if you're interested, you know, you can go and become involved.
Yeah, it's such a wonderful description of this concept of, you know, of thinking and acting like a movement. It's, you know, first of all, it doesn't mean you let go of your organizational priorities, and in fact you're arguing is to be very, very clear about your organizational priorities, but it does mean paying attention to what else is going on around you and then choosing which of those various movements that exist you want to align with, because it together you further the issue, but you don't set yourself up in opposition to the other aspects of the broader movements you're part of. You acknowledge them, you acknowledge that some of your members have conflicting or more a different view and are supportive of them, but you find a way, you negotiate through that by deciding which elements of the movement you will support and that are compatible with your mission.
Yes, and Art, I'd like to say just a couple of things because I know time is getting away from us, but I could never have done what I've done without the support of my husband and my mother. I was blessed with having maybe the only man on earth who could be so supportive, even though it meant I had to take off and travel around the world, leaving him home with 7 children at one time. And his attitude, he understood why it was important because of what we had gone through. And when I would get to another country, Paris or France or something, I could call home once because phone calls were so expensive. And whenever I called home, he'd want to know, was I okay? Everything was fine at home. I should have a wonderful time. He could never take me there himself. And I realized later the house could be falling apart in back of him, but he never would say this because he knew there was nothing I could do about it. And worrying about what was going on at home will only impact whatever I was able to do where I was. So he was an incredible help. He was very much part of what I did. And my mother, everybody loved her. My children loved her. My husband loved her. She loved being needed. She said, Mary, when you get old, you want to be used. You want people to need you. And so she was always willing to be there with cooking or doing things to help out at any time. So when I was thinking about this, I was realizing, as a successful organization, I feel what the grounding force is love. It's love, number one, for yourself, not burning yourself out and sacrificing to whatever this important movement is. Loving the people who are close to you and you who will be impacted by your work. I mean, not forgetting about them, realizing that they have needs too, and honoring your connections, and then love for what you're doing. I mean, the longer Leche kept going, we realized, number one, how important breastfeeding was. Because once women started breastfeeding, they were able to do research on breast milk and breastfeeding. And of course, all of those studies show how unique it is. It's not a milk that in any way compares to cow's milk, except they both have a lot of water in them. But that's where the comparison ends. And the other thing that we never realized would happen was the value of the people this would bring into our lives. Because these would be people who felt the way we did about what was going on. And that value not only lasts during the breastfeeding period, but for many of us, these are friendships that have lasted the rest of our life. We've had leaders who, when another leader was dying and was alone because her husband had already died, they raised money to go and sit with her while she was dying during those weeks to make sure she wasn't alone. That's the depth of the kind of friendships that come out of this, doing what your heart tells you to do. You meet other people at a heart level, and there's nothing like that.
So, Marian, can you tell me the meaning of mother-sized jobs to you? Because I think this this should be a motto for all movements. We don't necessarily need grand efforts, because you clearly, and your friends, your colleagues, the members of Leche have achieved something very magnificent in our world, and I believe that your motto was mother-sized jobs. Am I correct?
Absolutely. I mean, we weren't going to have a negative impact on the families who were involved in helping us to help other mothers. So that's how jobs were tailored. And of course, they would change as families grew, as now we have leaders whose children are in college, we have leaders whose children are married and are parents themselves, so they can change the kind of job they're able to make time for. But in the beginning, we were all having babies, and those jobs all had to reflect that, because even in the office, when when my youngest child was in second grade, I would go into the Leche office while he was in school. I would never leave until he had left for school in the morning, and I would get home before he came home in the afternoon. So that impacted the housework I didn't get done during the day, but I was able to give more attention to what was a growing organization all the time. Mm-hmm. Right now, I think we're in around 78 countries, but that changes all the time, too.
Yeah, and I actually, we will have time, because I want to ask you about the other involvements that you've had, where this has taken you. But I'm struck by, your continuous use of, of different language when describing action or causes. I haven't heard the word fight in there. I've heard heart, I've heard love, and I just wondered, it might be worthwhile to, to step back a bit, because I think the framing that you and your friends and fellow members offered through the Leche League, this was very instructive to Vicki and my work at Plan. It really came from an abundance point of view, but can you talk about this distinction between fighting versus loving?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. I had a conversation with our mutual friend, John McKnight, about this at one point, because the issue with childbirth was getting quite badalific, I would say, in the United States, where doctors who had attended births at home were being brought to court, even though they hadn't done anything bad. They were being told they couldn't practice at hospitals that they were at. And somebody said to me, you know, we've got to fight this. They're doing terrible things. And the thing is, they were doing terrible things. But I said to John, I really don't feel comfortable with that idea of becoming a warrior and fighting those rules and regulations that the medical profession was coming out with. I'm in the United States, in Illinois, the state I live in. We've just had our first labor and delivery suite outside of a hospital. The Medical Association fought it all these years, but we finally succeeded. So that was my idea. I felt totally uncomfortable with that idea of fighting. And I don't think we've ever really done that. I mean, some of the action or organizations might be in that mode, but in the Leche, we do what we do, and we explain to people why maybe what the opposition is doing isn't right, but it's up to them to make a decision about what they did. One of the first talks I gave away from home in Seattle, Washington, many years ago, I was on a panel with a doctor, and we were giving a session on breastfeeding, and he knew nothing about breastfeeding. It was amazing the things he was saying, because anybody who knew anything would know that, understand this. And when I got finished and got off the stage, somebody said to me, well, why didn't you put him down? He was so terrible. I mean, what he was saying, I corrected what he was saying, but just in a very gentle way. And I said, well, you know, he's a product of his upbringing and his education. He wasn't trying to say anything bad. That's the way he was brought up. So I'm not going to fight him or put him down because of that. And I think that's how we always, you know, I have always behaved with people who don't agree with us.
Thank you. You're ennobling me. There's clearly no room for moral outrage in how you have proceeded, Marian. Just a reminder to those who are listening live. Many of you will be listening later on through a podcast or something. But for those of you who are listening live, please text in your questions. Marian, you didn't stop with Leche, and in fact, you perceived that there was another challenge that was happening globally for women who had HIV/AIDS, and so you took on another very, very tough challenge, didn't you? Can you give us a brief overview of that tributary of your work?
Oh, well, I wasn't looking for something else to do. I mean, maybe this would give people the impression that I'm always looking for something to occupy my time. But the fact of the matter was, WHO came out really heavily, again, saying that mothers shouldn't breastfeed their babies if they are HIV positive, if it was at all possible. And so I was wondering why this came out, and I wrote to people at WHO and UNICEF and that, and everybody sent me this laundry list of research that when you looked at it and read it, realized it was all talking about HIV virus in bodily fluids or probably in breast milk. But again, it was genetic particles that they felt were HIV virus. And nothing that was done that proved that these particles were actually infectious, or that if they were infectious, there was enough of them to infect the baby. So what did this mean in terms of the baby's health? If for the first 30 years, mothers were told not to breastfeed, and it was only now that I realized, and with talking with a few other people who had looked into this, that we didn't have that information. And since my reason for living outside of my family and friends is to make sure women get proper education, when I found that by writing to the people in power that they had no answers, that I had to start an organization again, and I got a private chat list of people who were speaking on this issue and researching it all over the world, and we would discuss the research that was being done. And in the beginning, we would write to the comment on the research in the medical journals, and we got a lot of that printed out. But the thing that we did that had the most impact was at an international AIDS conference in Toronto, where we had a poster session saying that we had reviewed all the research that was used to bring out the recommendations that women not breastfeed, and found that not one piece of research actually was proved to have that effect, that babies were more likely to get AIDS if they were breastfed. And that got a lot of notice. It was written about online. WHO had another meeting to talk about their recommendations, and about a year or more later, they came out changing their recommendations totally, from saying you shouldn't breastfeed, or saying HIV-positive mothers on medication should exclusively breastfeed for the first 6 months and then continue breastfeeding while adding other foods. And some people told me privately we have probably killed more babies than we helped with that recommendation that they not breastfeed for 30 years. So I closed, it took us 11 years to get that message out, but I feel we really had a lot of influence in having that change, and it was work well done for us and my private chat list.
Thank you thanks for sharing that, and for just revealing how strong your heart is. Marian, there's a number of questions that are coming through here, and there's no way we're going to get to them. So I'm going to have to be an editor here. Every one of them is saying thank you so much for sharing. I think probably to summarize, what would be a couple of key steps, maybe just in reflection, when you realize that you've got a movement by the tail, what are a couple of key steps in your experience, or key pieces of advice that you would leave our listeners with?
Well, I think one of the keys to us, and which hasn't even been mentioned at all, that was from the very beginning, we had two doctors, Dr. White and Dr. Ratner, who read all our material, edited all our material that had a medical background. So we were very careful about what we said, that we wouldn't say anything that was incorrect or lead mothers astray by anything that we'd written. So I think if maybe the people who start the movement would be experts in that field, but that's an important thing, to make sure of what you have down in print is actually true, that those are facts, that you're not giving just opinions or what you'd like to believe. That gave us a lot of credibility through the years, and when we established our Center for Breastfeeding Information, we would get calls from people around the world on different breastfeeding issues, because nobody else had gathered that kind of and that much information about this particular subject.
So some of the other questions are related to this issue of getting along. There's one from a member of the listening audience who's involved in a statewide coalition, and they're geographically distant, and their disagreements are on the verge of tearing them apart. Any last minute?
Well, you know, even though they're far apart, I would say if there's anything that they can do, raise money, have a fundraiser, something to get together, being in the same room together, seeing each other, touching each other, would be the #1 key. And if you can't do that, I would say try to do FaceTime or Skype. Again, something where you can actually contact each other by sight, because email is a difficult way to work with problems. So I think if you can get together in any way, or have a few people get together at a time, knowing that you all want the best, that would be my first recommendation.
Right. Yes, there's nothing better than face-to-face. And I would say probably picnics in the park, Marian, too. That's such a wonderful story. And what I find really quite coincidental about it is that my favorite painting in the whole wide world is in Chicago, Picnic in the Park by Seurat. And I love going up the stairs. And so I'm very grateful for just that image of where and how you coalesced, how 7 of you came together and then spawned this, this movement, or perhaps series of movements that swirled and fused and morphed and whatever, but have benefited just about everybody in the world, if not everybody. So I want to thank you so much. This hour has gone by so quickly, as I knew it would. I'm very, very appreciative, and I want to thank you again for reminding us that we can become loving for justice and loving for equality. Thank you, Marian.
Thank you, Art. It was a pleasure.
All right. Okay, so back to our marvelous organizers at Tamarack, and thank you, everyone, for listening.
Thank you so much, Al and Marian, for sharing your insights and perspectives with us on the call today. And many thanks to all of you who joined us on today's call. Your comments and questions have helped make this a dynamic and thought-provoking conversation. A big thank you to our partners who have helped make this series possible: BC Partners for Social Impact, Planned Lifetime Advocacy Network, Social Innovation Generation, ABCD in Action, and Ashoka. Last but certainly not least, we would like to thank our supporters, Human Resources and Social Development Canada, the Maytree Foundation, J.W. McConnell Family Foundation, and the Province of Ontario for making these calls possible. As promised, in a few days, we will email you with links to the audio and other materials related to today's call, including a code for your free download copy of Al's book. We also welcome your feedback on these calls, so please do email Tamarack to let us know how we are doing. We encourage you to go online and register for the next Bookinar session on Tuesday, December 15th, 2015, from noon till 1 p.m. That's Eastern Time. I will be joined by Sean Moore, founder of the Advocacy School, for the pattern Advocate with Empathy. We are also hosting another webinar tomorrow with Karen Pittman and Alex Bazina, Deputy Minister for Ontario Ministry of Children and Youth Services, and we do encourage you to attend that as well. And finally, we have some exciting events coming up, and we encourage you to visit our website at www.tamarackcommunity.ca to learn more and sign up for our monthly e-magazine, Engage. Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks again, Al and Marian, and have a wonderful day, everyone.